Hey everybody, welcome into the Shelby County High School Football Show. My name, as always, Alec Etheridge, the sports editor here at the Shelby County Reporter. And boy, do we have some fun stuff to talk about on this week's show. We recap week 2 of the playoffs, and what an exciting week it was. Thompson and Briarwood both pick up big wins, advance to the third round of the playoffs. Calera falls in a tough battle with number 3 Beauregard. We'll look back at all 3 of those games. We'll touch on what's coming up this week for Briarwood and Thompson. Both have big matchups, specifically the Thompson Warriors, as they'll be taking part in the Game of the Year Part 2 against the Hoover Buccaneers there, this time on their home field. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Briarwood's third round matchup as well. And then we'll recap Calera's season, a strong run by Andrew Zhao there, the head coach, and his team. The Eagles put up a strong performance this past Friday against number 3 Beauregard in the second round. So an unbelievable season. They have a lot of talent coming back, so we'll touch on them as well. And as always, we'll talk about our SCR Stars of the Week at the very end of the video, as we do every week. Some great performances that led to those 2 teams advancing, and even some great performances for Calera this past Friday night in a tough loss. They gave a hard fight in that game against Beauregard. So we'll touch on all of that, but we, as always, will start in 7A as the Thompson Warriors advanced on to the semifinals of the 7A state playoffs. Friday, October the 27th, 2017. It's a day that will forever be in the history books for the Thompson Warriors. They upset the Hoover Buccaneers the first time in school history. They're now 1-20 all-time against the Hoover Buccaneers. They get that rematch this Friday night. This time they host. Last time it was at the Hoover Met. 15,000 fans or close to it showed up for that game in what was dubbed the Game of the Year at the high school level in Alabama. This week, it's at Larry Simmons Stadium this Friday night, so Thompson gets that home field advantage that they didn't have the first go-around, despite the well-traveled fans from Alabaster. So, what more can you ask for? The semifinals of the 7A state champion or state playoffs, with a trip to the state championship on the line, and the second part of what was one of the most exciting football games I've ever seen as a sports fan at all, at any level of competition. So those 2 teams this Friday are going to put it all on the line. There was plenty on the line that first go around, so just imagine what's going to happen this time around. You know Hoover's not going to be happy about what happened that first time. Thompson steals away the region championship. They steal away that undefeated record that Hoover had against them in the history books. So there's a lot Thompson's going to have to be prepared for, because Hoover's going to come out and lay down the hammer and give it big. They're probably their biggest fight that they've had in a long time. So before we touch on the game and talk a little bit about what needs to happen this Friday night for each team, we'll talk a little bit about their playoff runs up to this point to get to the semifinals. 2 rounds down. They have 2 to go if they want to win a state championship. But it started in round 1. Hoover took on a Sparkman team that was actually a pretty good football team, and Hoover dominated 49-7 in that one. They follow that up. They take on Hewitt-Trussville. A lot of people thought that was going to be a good, exciting game. I thought it would be a close one, but I thought Hoover was the better team, despite Hewitt being undefeated and ranked ahead of the Buccaneers. Hoover comes in. They lay the hammer down in that one, win it 56-20, 56-21. So off to an unbelievable start in these first 2 rounds. They answer back-to-back losses to Thompson and IMG Academy out of Tampa to end the season. They answered that with back-to-back wins in big ways to start the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. They're now in the semifinals where they meet the Thompson Warriors. Thompson in those first 2 rounds, really a similar start. They played pretty good in both games, but the first one specifically, they win 35-0 over Huntsville. Could have put up 60 points easily in that matchup. Their offense was dominant, and their defense pitches the first shutout of the season, something Coach Freeman could not talk enough about. He was so excited for that defense to do that. Defense, as cliche as it is, defense wins championships, and for them to start clicking this time of the year is perfect, and really to play their best game defensively of the season as well. They hadn't pitched a shutout despite the historic season. They hadn't pitched a shutout up to that point. So exciting to see the defense step up. That leads into week 2 of the playoffs, and that's where Thompson started to struggle a little bit. Not really on the defensive end. They did early, but they fall behind 7-0, 10-3 in that game, and trailed 10-6 at the half. And Mountain Brook was doing nothing special in that first half of the game. They came out and ran a game plan. Their top two running backs in A.J. Gates and Harold Joyner out. Hamp Sisson comes in and leads that team. Mountain Brook holds that 10-6 halftime lead, and Freeman goes into the locker room, and I'm sure he had some nice things to say to his team at the halftime break. Thompson came out a completely different animal, something they're going to have to do from the start this Friday night in a much bigger game. But they come out, they scored 28 unanswered points in that second half. I believe they scored all 28 of those points in about 15 and a half minutes, I believe. I remember writing it down being about 15 minutes and 48 seconds or so. So to put up 28 points in that quick of time, that means Talia Tungavaloa, the quarterback, started clicking. The defense was getting off the field, and that's what Coach Freeman put a key on. He's told me several times this season that getting off the field on third down is the biggest key for this football team. They started doing it in the second half. They weren't doing it at all in the first half, as Mountain Brook went on three 60-yard drives in that first half. There were some goal line stands in that first half by both teams that were big, but Thompson made one, which could have made the lead bigger for Mountain Brook. Mountain Brook made two, which could have put Thompson on top. But Thompson comes out 28 unanswered in the second half. They advance on to the semifinals. We'll talk about some individual performances from that game in our SCR Stars of the Week segment at the very end. But obviously, when you're putting up 28 points that quickly and the defense is stepping up, there's going to be some guys that we'll talk about. So that's the playoff run for both of those teams up to this point. I think Hoover's playing a little bit better football right now, but it's understandable that Thompson, they beat Mountain Brook 40-13 the first go around. They probably weren't giving 100% effort. I mean, they would never say that, but they were probably playing a little bit lighter in the early going of that game, knowing that they were the better team. They showed it in the second half. So now we move on to this game of the year, part two, between Hoover and Thompson this Friday night, and it couldn't be any more exciting. The first go-around, as I said, 15,000 fans out there. It was the biggest build-up that I've ever heard of at the high school level. I mean, fans talking about it all week, fans reading about it all week, and Thompson comes out. They pick up a big 32-25 win in that game. It was a back-and-forth affair where it looked like one team had all the momentum moving forward in the game, and then the other team would make a run. And Thompson got the last run. Hoover tried to make a run for it, but the Thompson defense stood up and made a big stop there in the last couple of minutes of that game. So, I mean, it couldn't have been any more exciting. As a sports fan, I said it several times, I had nerves, I had jitters going into that game, just knowing how good both teams were. I love watching good sports, good football, and they did not disappoint in that first go-around. This time we're in the semifinals. My nerves and jitters will be back, and I know the players' nerves and jitters will be back as well. So there's a lot on the line. These teams have to come out and just focus on the game of football. Thompson can't come out cocky with their 12-0 record because Hoover, I think, right now is the better team. I don't know whether that gives Thompson any motivation whatsoever or not, but right now Hoover is playing better football simply because they've played 4 or 8 complete quarters, whereas Thompson's played 6 in the last 2 games. So those 2 quarters in the first half kind of worried me against Mountain Brook because Thompson's going to have to come out. They can't fall behind early. They did in the first matchup against Hoover, and it almost cost them, but they have got to come out. They've got to put points up behind Tungavaloa early in that game. Give the defense a little bit of breathing room because Hoover is physical, and they can pound around the ball on the offensive side. But before we touch on Hoover's offense and what I think they need to do and talk a little bit about Thompson as well, I want to bring up the rematch factor. This is something you hear a lot about it in college football, especially in this state. When Nick Saban and Alabama take on a team for the second time, Saban tends to dominate those teams. He's not going to lose to a team twice. Coach Niblett at Hoover, the same exact way. He's lost one time in rematch games. He's 9-1 all time since taking over the gig, and that's because Hoover gives that X factor of being that team that scares a team. They intimidate other teams as well. That one time, however, a very similar situation to this 2 years ago, Spain Park had never beaten Hoover in school history. That first regular season game, Spain Park comes in, wins 17-0 for the first time. Exciting enough. The semifinals of the playoffs that year, a rematch of those two teams. And Spain Park, yet again, this one a lot tighter, a lot more exciting. They win 7-6 to advance to the state championship. So same exact situation this year. Thompson wins that first go-around, and then now they get them again in the semifinals, looking to do something that Spain Park has done, has been the only team to do against the Hoover Buccaneers. So that rematch factor is, I think, a big key. Right now, I tend to lean towards Hoover being able to pick up a win just simply because of that factor, that Coach Niblett's not going to let his guys do the same things that they did in that first go-around. And Thompson won't either, and they have, I think, the better offense. Thompson's got to be ready. We'll talk about Thompson first. Defensively, they have got to be ready from the go, because early in that game against Hoover looked like the better team, hands down. They came out shifting. Thompson was lost. They were confused and had no clue what was going on the defensive side of the ball. And then that allowed the blockers to somewhat get upfield. It allowed the running backs to follow those blockers. And those, I'm telling you, those linemen, those fullbacks, anybody that's blocking for Hoover was just having their physical way with the Thompson Warriors on the defensive side of the ball. Thompson got used to it. They adjusted to the schemes and got better as the game went along. They'll do the same thing this go around, but I think Hoover's going to take advantage of that early on and come out and see if Thompson's up for that physicality again, because it worked really well early in that game. But Thompson stepped up, and I'm telling you, defensively in that second half looked really physical, especially on Hoover's last opportunity in that game with a couple of minutes left. That defense forced them to 3 straight negative plays to win that game. So very important that they have that mentality early in that game. I know KJ Robertson, Jalen Raym talked a little bit about that after the game, that first go-around, that they came out a little bit sluggish in the early going, a little bit nervous. They weren't playing their full game plan and were a little hesitant. This time around, they can't do that. I think they'll be well prepared, having played in a big matchup like this already this season. That being said, Hoover, we'll talk about them now. They have got to change things up a little bit. They've run the ball nonstop this entire year, and they have some of the best running backs in the state. But the problem is it didn't help them late in that game. They did the same thing, and that's what led to those 3 negative plays at the end. When they're trailing down by 7 and a couple minutes left, they didn't throw the ball once except for a swing pass out wide that was also stopped for negative play. They've got to spread the ball downfield and take advantage. Thompson's front 7 is probably their strong suit, as well as the back 4, the defensive backs and the safeties have been playing. They can exploit them because Hoover's got some tall receivers and some guys that are committed to Division I schools. They can catch the ball down the field. So that's something I think Hoover needs to take a little bit more advantage of in this game. Thompson clearly caught on that first go-around to the run game. The problem is last week for the Buccaneers, 3 guys almost go over 100 yards. 2 did. 1 went for 94, I believe, or 97. So I think they're going to come out and run it again, which I don't know what that says or what that's going to mean. But if Thompson's up to the physicality test, then that gives them a good chance if Coach Niblett doesn't open up the playbook a little bit more. But either way, a historic season for the Thompson Warriors so far. And Coach Freeman's done unbelievable things in his first 3 years. Started with a 5-5 team his first year, 5-5 the second year, now 12-0. So history already there for the Thompson Warriors this season, no matter what happens in this matchup. The Hoover Buccaneers, they're one of the best teams that plays football really in the country at the high school level. So both of these teams already unbelievable seasons. No matter what happens Friday night, they're both going to leave it all on the field, and it should be a lot of fun to watch. I'll be there. We'll have a lot of great coverage for you from the game, but it should just be so much fun. A day after Thanksgiving and a huge sports week. So make sure it's going to be at Larry Simmons Stadium this go around. Make sure all the fans get out there. We'll see. We'll keep you updated if they do change the venue because of crowd size, but I don't think it's going to happen. So right now, scheduled to be at Larry Simmons. We'll talk about some individual performances from the Mountain Brook game for Thompson at the end in our SCR Stars of the Week segment. But right now, we'll jump into Briarwood as they also advanced on to round 3 of the playoffs. Well, I thought this week's show was going to go a little bit quicker, but then I spent 12 minutes talking about the Thompson Warriors and their matchup with Hoover, and rightfully so. I mean, one of the biggest matchups that we've seen in a long time, being in the semifinals and a rematch of a big game earlier in the year. This Briarwood-Etowah game we'll spend a little bit of time on, but not quite as much, mainly because I feel confident in Briarwood's ability to pick up a win this Friday night. We'll talk about the team's playoff runs up to this point, as we did with Thompson earlier. And it starts with Etowah. They pick up a 42-21 win over Brooks this past week, but start the playoffs with a slim 15-12 win over Pleasant Grove. They're lucky to be at this point, and that's Pleasant Grove's a team that Briarwood played this year as well, and it was Briarwood's closest game. They won that one 21-14. but really should have won that one by a lot more as well. Briarwood's run so far in the playoffs, they win 35-14 this past week over Lee Huntsville. A lot of people seem to think that was going to be a close game. Was named the game of the week for some, but I looked back at it, and Lee Huntsville had not beaten a team with a winning record this year. The 3 teams they had played that were any good, they lost to all 3 and put up a combined 13 points. So I knew Briarwood was going to handle business this past Friday night over Lee Huntsville. They did just that. They started the week before even bigger, a 62-0 win over Crossville, put up 55 points in the first half in a dominant effort for the Lions in round 1. The playoffs is what I've said it every week. It's what they've been playing for this entire year. Since the preseason, they've talked about nothing more than making it to this point and redeeming last year's semifinal loss. They're 1 game away from getting back to the semifinals. You can't tell me they aren't going to be amped up and ready to go this Friday night as they take on Etowah. Now, Etowah will be the best team probably that they've played this year. They've won 10 consecutive games, sit at 11-1 on the season, but kind of similar to Lee Huntsville that Briarwood faced last week. Etowah, they've beaten some teams with winning records, but a lot of those games have come by 5 points, by 3 points. They've struggled in their toughest matchups, and this week they're playing a different animal. Briarwood's the best team in the 5A classification, number 1 for a reason. They're the best team I've seen on the field defensively this entire season. So they pitched that shutout in round 1. They only give up 14 in round 2, and on the season through 12 games, they're only giving up 9.1 points per game. That's one of the best defenses in the state. I think it is the best defense in the state numbers-wise. So what they're doing right now defensively, Etowah is not going to score very many points, despite them scoring 31.7 per game. I think they'll be lucky to get past 14 or 17 in this one. 17 is the most that Briarwood's given up this season. They've given up 14 on a couple of occasions, but the offense has already gone up by enough points to where that didn't matter. So the defensive effort for Briarwood will be key in the early going. You don't want Etowah to get some confidence on that side. But that being said, even if they do score some points early and Briarwood falls behind, I have confidence in Briarwood's offense to get back into it and Briarwood's defense to clamp down. So just every angle I look at this, I just think Briarwood's the better football team right now. But it could, Etowah's defense only giving up 12.8 points per game right now. They're a solid defense as well. But Lee Huntsville was only giving up 12 point something as well. So Briarwood put up 35 on them. And that's something I want to talk about. You know, this defense gets so much credit. The offense has as well, but the defense so much, only giving up 9.1 per game. This offense is really helping them out lately, especially. I know they're freed up. Coach Curley's told me that several times, the offensive coordinator, that they're freed up because of how good their defense is. But for them to come out with guys like J.R. Tranrino, the running back, he puts up all 5 touchdowns in that win over Lee Huntsville. Just unbelievable to see what he's done. He's, I believe, at 20 touchdowns on the season right now, if not more than that. So it's just been an unbelievable run by him this year. And then you've got a quarterback in Michael Ayers who is starting to show the kind of ability he has and why he almost was the starter as a junior last year, but having a great senior season, very smart, very composed, and he has a couple of wideouts that make it a lot easier for him in Carson Eddy and Hudson Hartsfield. Those 2 guys have been unbelievable as well at catching the ball, and it showed in that game against Crossville when they 2 plays into the game, and Michael Ayers has found Carson Eddy for a couple of touchdowns and 100-plus yards. So that shows how quick and dynamic this offense can be, and you pair that with this defense that's giving up 9.1 per game. It's just going to be a difficult task for Etowah, I think, to overcome. I think their defense keeps them in it early, but I think by the end, Briarwood's defense wins that battle and leads them on to the semifinals of the playoffs, where they get a rematch with either Winona or St. Clair County, teams that they've already handled this year. So they're 2 games away from getting where they want to get, from getting where they've wanted to be since the start of the season. They're not going to fold now. They're not going to quit. Briarwood's going to advance to the semifinals of the 5A state playoffs, and I have no doubt they're going to the state championship. I've been on that bandwagon since before the season started. They're not going to quit at this point. They're all in. They're going all the way, in my opinion. I can't waver on that decision right now. So Briarwood, in my opinion, another big win this Friday night as they advance on to the semifinals of the 5A playoffs. All right, now that we've touched on our two playoff teams that still remain heading into the quarterfinals for Briarwood and the semifinals for Thompson, we'll touch quickly on the Calera Eagles and their 2017 football season. The rest of the show should go by kind of quickly. We're going to recap their season real quick as they finished, I believe, 7-5 on the year. And a great year for the Calera Eagles in 2017. We'll touch on our SCR Stars, which shouldn't take long as well. We only have two teams to talk about there. But talking about Calera, this past week they take on number 3 Beauregard in the second round of the playoffs, a chance to advance to the 5A quarterfinals. And they had a real shot. Beauregard without their top running back in LaDamian Webb, who is one of the best running backs in the state. And Calera came out ready to play. They took a 14-10 lead into the half. They were outscored 20-3 the rest of the way in the second half. However, end up falling 30-17 in that game. But late in that matchup, just a few minutes left, they had a chance to actually take the lead on a drive down 23-17, but could not convert. Beauregard went on to add the insurance touchdown there late in that one. But the future is so bright for this Calera team. Coach Dow's come in and done a great job there turning things around. We really didn't have to turn things around, but has done a great job of continuing that success. Now they have to get over that hump, make it into the third round of the playoffs. They have that second round jinx going on right now, and I think they've got a good shot next year. They return a lot of their best players, especially at quarterback Cornelius Brown, who is getting looks from a lot of schools right now, from what I hear. So he's just a strong playmaker on that offensive side of the ball, standing at least at 6'5", in my opinion, from what I've seen. He's a great talent. And with that year of starting experience as a junior, he started a couple games to end the year as a sophomore last year as well. Him coming back is going to be invaluable to this team's success next year. They also get back some of those best playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. The key they lose is DeCorian Mickens. He had a fantastic run there for Calera, was on the cover of our magazine this year as well, one of the magazines, because of his great play there for the Eagles. They do, however, get back Tyler Agnew, who took over for Mickens when he was injured at a couple of points. He comes back at the running back position, can play defense as well. Quindarius Cruz and D. Woodson and Chandler Smith, some of the best receivers on this team back as well. This offense is going to light things up next year. They need to maybe improve a little bit defensively, but this team, when they clicked on both sides this year, was scary. Next year, I think they're going to put it all together. I think they're going to make a run in the playoffs next season if this team stays together, if a lot of these players stay on the team. Coach Dow has this thing headed in the right direction for the Calera Eagles. So now we'll close the show out with our SCR Stars of the Week segment. We've got a few guys I want to talk about really quickly, and they come from our two teams still playing in the playoffs. The Briarwood Lions advanced on to the quarterfinals of the 5A state playoffs, and the Thompson Warriors into the semifinals, a rematch against Hoover, one game away from the state championship game. They said, a couple of guys said early in the year, state championship or bust this year. We'll start with the Thompson Warriors as they look to make that come true. And it starts this past week against Mountain Brook. A tough first half. They really just didn't look into the game. Didn't look like they had their best in them on the night. But then they come out. Thompson becomes Thompson in the second half. That offense explodes. 28 unanswered points. Starts with Talia Tungavaloa. He had 251 yards and 3 touchdowns, all of which pretty much came in the second half. He had 31 yards at the halftime break, so ended up with 220 yards and 3 touchdowns in that second half of play. They should have had more points in the first half, but a couple of goal line stands there prevented them from scoring early in that game. Alonde Vassar, what a performance from him in this game. He had 76 yards, 7 receptions, 2 touchdowns, and both of those touchdowns, unbelievable grabs. He dives, lays out for both of those catches, one on the right side of the end zone, the other on the left side of the end zone, to cover the entire field. An impressive performance from Alonde Vassar. And while he did a great job at the receiving position, the rest of them did too. This is a strong receiving corps, as I have said all year. They end up with several guys putting in a strong performance. Ahmad Edwards, 49 yards, a few more receptions. I believe he had around 7 receptions as well, somewhere around that mark, as he edges closer to breaking the state record for receptions in a year. His cousin, Mo Edwards, 66 yards, finished second on the team. And Michael Petway, 50 yards receiving as well. So those guys, they really locked in on Ahmad and Mo, did Mountain Brook. But Michael Petway and Alonde Vassar both showed that they could step up. And how about the defense? Only 10 points allowed so far in the playoffs, 0 in the first round to Huntsville, 10 just in that first half against Mountain Brook. So they've pitched 6 quarters of shutout football in the playoffs so far. Really getting off the field on third down is going to be so key for them against Hoover. I can't stress that enough, and Coach Freeman's not going to be able to stress it enough at practice this week. If they can get off the field on third down, which money down is what they call it there at Thompson, that's when they're going to make their money. If they want to go to the state championship, they're going to have to do that this Friday night. But the defense playing really well right now. I expect them to bring their all and give it their all as they take on Hoover on Friday night. Talking about Briarwood real quick, we've got a couple of guys I want to mention, and it starts none other than J.R. Tranrino. An unbelievable performance from him in that win over Lee Huntsville. They win 35-14. He had all 5 touchdowns in that game, 102 rushing yards and on 26 carries. He also has, on the year now, 24 total touchdowns, 20 on the ground, 4 receiving, and 1,424 all-purpose yards. So Tranrino having one of the best years in the county, specifically one of the best running backs that we've seen this year there from Briarwood and J.R. Tranrino. Carson Donnelly, another name I want to throw out. He had an interception yet again. He is just such a lockdown guy on the defensive side of the ball. A big reason they're only giving up 9.1 points per game and sitting at 12-0 right now. And one other guy I meant to mention with Thompson, Shadrick Bird. He had 86 yards rushing, a touchdown in that game for Thompson. He's going to be a big key this Friday night against Hoover. He had a good game against them the first go-around and really was the shining star, in my opinion, in that first win over the Hoover Buccaneers. But with Joseph Ford out, he's going to have a big burden on his shoulder, a lot of weight to carry. So we'll see if he can live up to that this Friday night for the Thompson Warriors. That being said, these two teams on to the quarterfinals for Briarwood, the semifinals for Thompson. Should be a lot of fun the day after Thanksgiving this Friday night. I'll be out covering. We'll have stuff on Twitter at SCR Sports, and as always, Facebook Live before the game, live at Larry Simmons Stadium this Friday night as well. So tune in for that. But other than that, enjoy this week. Enjoy the build-up. Enjoy your Thanksgiving break. And happy Thanksgiving to everybody as you enjoy that before you enjoy, as always, your football Friday nights.